What is the human superorganism? And why does it have cancer? And what can we do about that cancer? And this is, of course, an analogy. It's an analogy that I got from Nate Hagens, but I think this is such a powerful and important analogy that it's worth unpacking all three of these questions. Since reading his book and listening to his stuff, I've started to think about what I'm doing on this channel with the paradigm shifts in economics, governance, and knowledge systems. I've started to think about that as a rejiggering of the nervous system of the human superorganism. And this is because I think these analogies are going to be essential for people to be able to move into a new type of system. And of course, when I'm thinking about these paradigm shifts, they have to do with collective action mechanisms. So here we're talking about voting systems, about markets, about algorithms that take information about the way people are, say, voting with their feet and aggregating that in a way to make some kind of collective decision. That's what I'm really thinking about when I'm thinking about these paradigm shifts that we might have coming. And there are such good analogies between that and the way the human body has chemical and electrical signals that help the body to regulate itself. Like if you look at any of the body systems, the nervous system or the circulatory system, the endocrine system, the digestive system, there's all kinds of information that recognizes when there's a problem in a certain part of the body, when it's in pain or when it needs to be addressed in some way by, say, channeling resources toward that part of the body. And the whole body operates in a way that serves the whole body well, that helps the whole body interact with its environment in a way that is good for the whole body. And I think it's helpful to think about the human superorganism in this way. Because if one part of the body is in pain and another part scoffs at that part of the body, that kind of animal would not survive very long in an evolutionary system. And if what you have is a system where these collective intelligence mechanisms like voting and markets and algorithms and checks and balances on power through the courts, if those are bent toward power, and increasingly so over time, that's going to suck resources away from parts of the body that really need those resources to live out their own values, if we're talking about the human superorganism. And the ways the superorganism maps onto all three of these economics, governance, and knowledge systems, in terms of how it moves resources inside the body and how it takes in resources from the outside and excretes them on the other side, those are powerful analogies that I'll flesh out a little bit more in a second. But first we have to ask the question, what exactly is the human superorganism? And I think we have to start that by asking, what is a superorganism more generally in biology? Because superorganisms are going to be ant colonies and bee colonies, and it's a term used in biology all the time. So what is the difference between like an ant colony and just a collection of wolves or other groups of animals that also have some kind of social relationship? And the key here is going to be in division of labor and in collective behavior of these animals or insects or organisms or whatnot that is different than you can actually see or perceive or observe if you just observe one ant or one bee. It's where the social structures of that organism work together to create something that's actually bigger, that involves different roles and different parts and division of labor and interconnections within that community of insects usually, that makes the whole thing have properties of its own in the way it interacts in the environment. You can kind of see where this is going. Like, how does this relate to a human superorganism? And human societies also certainly have these major social relationships and division of labor and roles, where such that societies as a whole are going to have properties that are bigger and more powerful and that you couldn't necessarily predict just by looking at one human being. And of course, part of the deal with this channel is that I'm arguing there's this phase shift in the human superorganism that is happening when we now have digital tools that speed up these social connections and these informational connections and these economic connections that guide the human superorganism. And of course, a phase shift is in systems thinking is kind of like water suddenly switching to ice. Like it suddenly goes from a liquid to a solid when it reaches a certain degree. And historically, there was some phase shift in biology when we went from a world with only single-celled organisms to a world that had multi-celled organisms, where there's, of course, like debates and scientific disagreement about how exactly that might have happened. But at some point, those single-celled organisms came together and specialized and sort of worked as a group. And at some point, they came to have the same DNA such that their incentives were completely aligned. And going from a world of single-celled organisms to a world of multi-celled organisms, that was certainly a phase shift in biological history. And when it comes to the human superorganism on the planet, we're sort of in the middle of a phase shift right now. And it's worth taking a moment to flesh out how the human superorganism relates to each of these three areas of the New Enlightenment: economics, governance, and knowledge systems. And for economics, that's obviously going to involve scarce resources. And with the real-world environment, human superorganism, those scarce resources are going to be oil and the Earth's resources and labor and attention. Like any resource that's scarce, that the economy has to decide, where does this flow toward? Where does this flow away from? All of that is going to be analogous with the body system's ability to extract nutrients from food and channel those nutrients to different parts of the body and extracts them through the other side. The human superorganism is going to take resources from the earth and excrete resources in various places, of course. And so there's this major analogy with sort of the way the human superorganism uses resources, decides what to eat, essentially, from the Earth's resources, where to leave that excrement. I think that analogy actually works pretty well. But of course, governance and information systems, those also are at play in the body. And I'll talk about governance systems a little bit later in the video when I talk about the gate control theory of pain. So I'm going to leave that off for now. But information systems travel in the body through both chemical signals and electrical signals. Like your nervous system is one mechanism that the body uses to channel information across different parts of the body. And of course, chemicals like hormones and other styles of chemicals in the body, those also communicate between the brain and other parts of the body in an information way. And you might say, wait a second, hormones are both like physical resources that have to be moved in a physical way, and they're also informational resources. So do hormones belong in the economics part of this equation or the information part of this equation? And actually, I do think those belong in both. They have both elements to them. And the same, I think, will be true of certain things in the economy. Like I oftentimes talk about the attention economy, where attention, people's attention, that's a scarce resource. And it has both this economic element to it, where we decide how we channel people's attention, like the population's attention, through these social media algorithms. But so that's the economic side of that. But it's also obviously an informational side. Like what we pay attention to will deeply influence our perception of reality, and the information that we're capable of perceiving. So these three things are actually so interconnected. I do think it's useful to talk about them separately, but they're all part of the whole body system. The next question here is, why does the human superorganism have cancer? And part of the story here has to do with the blind spots of this human superorganism. And of course, Nate Hagens, the title of his book is Reality Blind, which is of course alluding to the fact that the human superorganism is not perceiving its environment properly. And I kind of view it as two areas where this superorganism is blind. One is its relationship to its environment. And of course, that's his focus. He focuses on oil and resources and the way resources are not being channeled in a way that actually serves the whole human superorganism well. But then there's this second blind spot, which is that the human superorganism is not perceiving pain in different parts of its body. Like a healthy human being or a healthy animal of any kind is going to perceive pain in different parts of its body and attend to that pain according to what's most urgent right now, what's most dire. And there's even this gate control theory of pain, which basically says, okay, you might have different pain signals all over your body. And there's some system for deciding which of those pain signals is most dire and most urgent for you to attend to. And of course, whatever mechanism in your brain prioritizes pain and different signals around the body in terms of perception and feelings and all that, that has evolved in a way that serves the survival of the species and the reproductive system of the species. And we might think of this pain in the way I'm thinking about the New Enlightenment as the governance system. Like the governance system would ideally take in all of the worries and complaints that it hears from different parts of the world, different parts of the human society, and it would prioritize those in a way that at least somewhat made sense for the well-being of the whole superorganism. And it would take the different communities that perceive different things about the environment, and it would prioritize those well as well. Now, the gate control theory relates to prioritization of things that actually reach the brain. But it is worth noting that not all governance inside the body involves the conscious brain. Like, for example, white blood cells are these cells that will heal your wounds. So if you get wounded, you need chemical and electrical signals inside the body to register that pain and to cause your white blood cells to move over to come heal that wound. And that certainly happens without a person ever consciously thinking about it. And I think the white blood cell analogy actually is really good at seeing how these three areas are interconnected. Like there's governance with the white blood cell analogy, because if you have multiple wounds in your body has to decide which of those white blood cells go to one wound, which go to another, which wound is going to get more white blood cells moving in that direction. So it's governance in terms of prioritization inside the body. But also, obviously, the white blood cells are a scarce resource, so that's economics. And the information system that leads to the decision about which of the wounds on your body is most dire, like which of the wounds should your white blood cells prioritize, that's an information problem. So these three areas are very interconnected, both in a regular human body system, but also in the human superorganism, where there's going to be interconnections in terms of how we jigger voting, markets, algorithms, and systems that hold power in check. So part of the reason the human superorganism has cancer relates to its blindness. And of course, the blindness of the superorganism is going to relate to the paradigm shifts that we need in the knowledge realm. And I kind of think of it as the body has all of these sensory organs. So it's not that there aren't people in the system who see the issues with the environment, or people who see the issues with their part of the superorganism, like the pain there and the problems that need to be solved. The problem is that information never makes it to the brain and the hands of the superorganism. Like, it never gets acted upon. So that makes the superorganism as a whole blind, even if the relevant information might be coming in through the sensory organs around the body. That's how I think of it. And this paradigm shift we need is going to have to do with how do we take information from all of these different sensory organs and aggregate it into a usable whole that can actually cause the superorganism to act in its own interest, in the interest of the environment, in the interest of any part of its body that might be in pain. How does it actually address those effectively? And knowledge is one of those keys. But let's continue with this analogy with cancer. So one thing cancer does is it sucks resources from the body into its own growth in a way that harms other parts of the body. And of course, economic systems can suck up resources into, say, battles between groups that are just wasting resources and wars and in rent-seeking economic behavior and all that, where those resources are kind of needed in other parts of the body, where other parts of the human superorganism are suffering and withering away, even as this cancerous part of the economic system grows and grows and grows because of its ability to suck away resources. And of course, all of this is regulated by information. Like, our body regulates information through chemical signals and through electrical signals in the nervous system. There's all kinds of information flows that channel the use of resources in the human body and that prioritize the use of human resources. Now, I'm going to use a slightly different verb than he is about the cancer situation. I'm going to say the human superorganism has cancer. Sometimes he will say the human superorganism is cancer. And I mean, part of this is just that it's an analogy. Analogies are essential, I think, for reframing human thinking. But neither of these analogies, neither of these verbs is perfect. And the reason I'm going to avoid the human superorganism is cancer, that kind of language, is that makes it seem like what needs to happen is genocide, or is like killing off human beings. And I am quite certain that he does not intend that. But I think because the solution to cancer is oftentimes killing the cancer cells, that analogy will happen automatically in people's brains. Now, has cancer is actually also not a perfect analogy. And the reason here is because cancer is a physical thing. Like, it's these particular cells that kind of take over the body. Whereas the disease that the human superorganism has is more of a process-oriented disease. And in systems theory, this actually matters. And it's actually worthwhile, like, thinking a little bit about how this connects with system theory. So let's do that. And so if we turn to the systems thinking literature, this literature has 3 parts to systems, which are elements, connectors, and purposes. And elements are the things in the system. They're usually the most visible, the easiest to see and describe, the easiest to measure. So like, you think of a basketball team, the elements there are the players. And then the connectors are going to be the incentive structures, the rules of the game that determine who moves in and out, who plays what roles, what will they get or not get if they do certain behaviors. And if you think about the basketball team analogy, you can flip out all of the players of a basketball team, and it doesn't actually change the system that much. But if you change the rules of the basketball game, that actually totally changes the nature of the beast. And purposes, of course, are what the system does, which is not always what it says it does, because oftentimes systems have very pro-social missions. But it becomes obvious that an organization is not serving its pro-social role when it starts to do bad things and starts to sort of make its purpose, growing itself and all that. So my point here is that people are the elements of the human superorganism. And what needs to be changed and rejiggered to get rid of the cancer is not to change out the people, it's rather to change out the connectors. It's rather to change out the incentives that structure the relationships between those people, structure the flow of economic resources through the body of the human superorganism. It's the connectors that have to be rejiggered as we redesign the nervous system and all these other body systems of the human superorganism. Now, some scientists who study cancer might actually be like, oh yeah, there's huge processes involved in cancer, they're really important, but that isn't the point. The point with an analogy is, what is the thing, like in this case cancer, in the collective brain, in most people's minds. And in most people's minds, it's the thing of the cell. It doesn't have anything to do with the processes in the body. So has cancer isn't the perfect analogy. I don't know if there is a perfect analogy, but I think it's good enough and it's powerful enough to use anyway. And why am I making such a big deal about analogies? And the reason is I think analogies will be essential for ushering in people's thinking in terms of different systems. And we can even think back to the age of the internet, when the internet was first coming on the scene. People needed the analogies of the file folder and the mouse and the trash can, the recycling bin. They needed these really powerful analogies to things they were already familiar with in order to actually functionally move into the internet environment. And I think with these huge paradigm shifts that I think are possible in the near future, we're going to need analogies that help people make those shifts. So this is a really powerful one. I think it could be essential. So if the last question is, how do we cure the cancer of the human superorganism? It really does have to do with thinking carefully about economic systems, the rules of the game of economic systems, governance systems, the rules of the game there. And I think the foundation is going to be knowledge systems. Like, how does knowledge flow in and out of a system? Because, of course, our economic system is very informationally based, as is our governance system. Like, knowledge is the foundation. And that's true in a body as well. Knowledge passes through these different organs, through chemical signals and all these other signals. And so we live in a moment when we are in this phase shift as everything is sped up due to artificial intelligence, digital technologies, the different economic networks that make things work and that cause resources and people and relationships to flow and change. And I do think there is a moment when small changes in algorithms and in connectors for supply chains and all that, small changes in those connections can deeply impact the structure of the system. So doing that in a way that's intentional, doing that in a way that will get rid of the blind spots of this human superorganism, that is the task. It's the task of this channel. It's the task we have to manage if we don't want this human superorganism to drive itself into a dark place.